All right. A warm welcome to everyone that has now made our time to join our ESG 101. We are happy to have you here, and it is great to see you all. It's interesting to know that we have attracted attention or attendance for this meeting from the various parts of Africa and the world. So this webinar series is brought to you by the Newmark Group under the auspices of Influence 21. So this is one of our monthly series of high-powered conversations covering a variety of issues in leadership, strategy, sustainability, and development. I am Lovelyn Okafor. I'm the country lead for the Newmark Nigeria markets, and I'm honored to be your host for today. And before we begin our exploration, I would like to share some housekeeping guidelines. You may please use the Q&A function on Zoom to put any questions across to our speakers. You can also share your thoughts and comments and engage with us through the chat section so that we can have an interactive session. Today, we'll be tackling the topic, Unpacking the Social and Governance Pillar of ESG. Our goal here is to deepen your understanding of ESG and equip you with the knowledge and tools that you need to navigate distinguished experts. Each of them have a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field. Our speakers are Natasha Clarack, the General Director of Athenora Consulting, which is a leading independent public affairs firm based in Brussels, offering unparalleled expertise in EU affairs. Our other speaker today is Verona Mwila, Head of Corporate Communications at Copperbelt Energy Corporation PLC, which is one of the largest international power traders in Africa. Gentlemen and ladies, without further ado, I would like us to embark on this very exciting journey. So I'll call on the floor Natasha Clarack, the General Director of Athenora Consulting. Natasha will be unpacking the governance pillar. She'll be talking about the role of governance in driving organizational performance, stakeholder engagement, and trust. Natasha, you have the floor, please.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to share some insight with you. And please do not hesitate to ask questions, so it will be a lively debate. This discussion comes at a very timely momentum. Maybe you know today the European Parliament has finally adopted the due diligence directive that will have impact everywhere in the world, embarking companies to the good management of their supply chain in the world. You have noticed over the last 2 decades, ESG topic has increased in terms of transparency, in terms of influence, and now ESG topics are at the same level as financial topics in terms of reporting, but not only reporting, it gains influence in the world society, customers, suppliers, new employees. They are looking towards what companies are doing in terms of ESG. So get ready now for a new ESG standard and strategy. And my first message for you will be, do not consider ESG topic or momentum just as a compliant exercise or a reporting obligation. For you as company, as stakeholders, it's important to see ESG as a strategic move in the hands of the companies at the highest level. And in this journey, internal and external communication as key driver in order to move toward effective compliance, effective strategic move. Because I'm convinced that if companies are driving their ESG standards up to the highest level, it brings them business resilience and competitive advantage. Today, I would like to focus on one fundamental dimension of this ESG trio, which is the term G. What does it matter? First, because good governance is key to implement the foundation on which the two other pillars, the E and the S, can develop, because it builds a culture of trust, a good environment, and it creates transparency, accountability, which are key in today's world. And those keywords are necessary to promote investments, financial stability, and the integrity of the company in the long run. So it's important. Moreover, suppliers are being asked to share information about the integrity of their whole supply chain, not only in Europe, not only in the States, not only in Africa, but on the global stage. Customer expectation when it comes to governance are also growing, because we have this notion that company, they can drive good governance. They have the skills, they have the possibility to choose what is right and what is not. So it's important to communicate and to drive the strategy of the company regarding governance. Of course, there are big mistakes that are being done by companies when they don't know how to apply this governance effort. One is having a vague language in the communication. If you don't know what you measure, then you can't have milestones. You can't have impetus for driving the good within the company. So you need clear languages. What is for you, according to your company, your territory, what you need to do in order to comply with standards. Second big mistake, when the efforts lacked transparency. It's essential in your communication that you have transparency regarding what you do. It's a journey towards better standards. So make true assessment of where you are in terms of corporate strategy, and show the direction where you want to embark your employee, your suppliers, your clients or customers. Another big mistake is when a company focuses too much on environmental or social issue and overlooked this governance department. But governance is a key pillar for a true ESG standards. Another big mistakes I'm saying is when companies are not enough engaging their stakeholders in their ESG strategy. And it's especially important when you talk about good governance, because good governance also must embark your stakeholders, and you have to take into consideration their opinion, their feedback. Of course, using greenwashing tactics, whatsoever you call them, will be tricky, because what you must install when you're talking about your ESG standards is what trust you will bring to the other world. And the biggest failure is when companies lack integrating this ESG thinking in their business strategy. ESG, and especially governance part, must be at the heart of your strategic direction of the company. It's really important. Why it's important to measure governance? Because if you allocate time and resources to improve governance, you need first to know where is your starting point? What kind of indicators can you use to measure where you are and where you want to go? Showing this journey, showing that you are responsible, you are accountable to what you're doing, the positive and the negative aspect of your activities. But it's true, the governance aspects are more tricky to measure than environment. For environment or even social dimension, you have many international standards. For governance, it's more difficult. There are still gaps in terms of how can you measure that you are having a good business strategy in terms of good governance. To put it straight, good governance is all the processes that a company will implement in order to have a fair evaluation of the processes, the structure in place to make sure that you are compliant with all the procedure and the expectation. It's hard to give a comprehensive list of all the components that constitute this corporate governance, but I will try to give you some insight. In a word, corporate governance means the structure of rules, policies, and practices that are used to manage a company. This is why expectations are higher in terms of good governance, because company has the power to choose what to do. There are many challenges to approach this governance, and there are many difficulties. First of all, there are many standards. It's difficult to apply these good governance standards to the reality and the complexity of the companies. It's hard to get measurement tool because sometimes the standards can be quite vague when it's come to governance, and the internal processes can be blurred. Moreover, you don't have strong database or reporting system implemented in order to facilitate the reporting exercise and to pilot your governance. And regulation at national, European, international level are evolving very rapidly. So it's difficult for a company to monitor and to be able to comply with the rules. You don't have one specific data set of rules that you have to follow. You must monitor, especially for company with a global outreach. You don't have only one legal tool. You have to follow many standards, many regulation, and it takes time, I know. Nonetheless, you cannot just say it's too complicated, so I won't do it. You should invest time at the highest level of the company to invest in good governance. But what does it mean? You have 5 items that if you look at all the European and international standards that have been developed over the years, 5 key areas where company at least should do an assessment of what they are doing and if their actions are aligned with the expectation. The first one is the effectiveness of the board of directors. Who is taking decision? Are they at the right place? Do they have the leadership to drive this good governance within the company? Do you have good decision-making processes that prevent problems? Do you know how to measure the positive impact of the companies? Do you know the positive impact of your performance. So everything which is related to the effectiveness of who are within a company in a position to decide. The second one is about risk and crisis management. Do you have risk management that allow you to understand the threat, the obstacle, but also the opportunities to create and protect the value of your company? Do you have this risk awareness first? And second, the risk management in place, allowing you to drive this good governance. So first, effectiveness of the board of directors. Second, having in place a risk and crisis management system that fully operates. Third, of course, it's come to the topic of compensation and remuneration, with this idea of fairness. You need fair remuneration, incentive structure to provide the will of the talent within your company to do more, but you also need to align the interest of the company with the interest of the people working for this company. And having this alignment with the employees' objectives and the company objectives. And communication, once again, it's a key driver in order to make sure that everyone feel fairly treated within the company. Outside the company, you also need to look at the relation you have with all your stakeholders. You operate on territories. What are your key stakeholders? What kind of relation do you have with them? Is it a fair relation? Do you work with suppliers, with customers? Do you treat fairly your supply chain? Those are key questions when you want to tackle this dimension of good governance. And last but not least, of course, good governance is also linked with the topics of ethics and transparency, meaning the relation you have with decision makers, what we call lobbying, but also the regulation that you put in place within your company to make sure that your employees are following the good rules. They know what to do and what to avoid. To have trainings regarding bribery, for instance, regarding what you have to do in order to win a market, but keeping the highest level of standards when it comes to fairness. Do you have fair competitive practices? Do you have business ethics? Is this business ethic not only in the mind of the board of directors, but also shared with all employees within the company? Do you have tax strategy that is fair? Do you have lobbying practices, written lobbying practices, to make sure that everyone within the company understands what they have to do when they have a discussion with decision makers? So overall, this is the key items when it comes to good governance. So board of directors, risk and risk management, remuneration, the relation with the stakeholders, the ethics and transparency. These are the 5 key items you must measure when it comes to governance. I might stop here if there are some first questions. I'm happy to continue.
Thank you very much, Natasha. That was a lot of information there.
I know.
Yes, very insightful also. You know, and I was happy to listen to you talk about corporate governance, the way organizations should normally be governed, and the items you listed that had to do with effectiveness of the board. I can tell you, a lot of people I have told, I said, companies grow and fall based on the structure and the effectiveness of the board. So that is very key there. And then you talked about risk and crisis management, which is also very important for every organization to survive and thrive. You talked about compensation and remuneration. You talked about relationship with stakeholders. And the ethics and transparency, that's also very key. You know, governance actually serves as the backbone of organizational success. It guides decision-making, it helps to foster collaboration, it helps to uphold trust. You know, as businesses navigate an ever-evolving landscape, there is need to put proper governance structures in place. So yes, that's a lot of information you've given, and I'm very excited about this. I believe that people are taking notes. We'll take questions, but I think we can take the questions when the next speaker is done, so we can just take all of the questions. So yes, we will go to the next speaker now. We'll be hearing from Verona Wheeler, who is the head of corporate communications at Copperbelt Energy Corporation, PLC. She'll be talking from the social perspective. She'll be sharing some of the strategies for enhancing social performance, best practices, and actionable insights. I'm delighted. I can't even wait to listen. So let's just go on to Verona. Verona, please, you may go on now.
You are mute. Sorry.
I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Natasha. And thank you, Lovelyn, again for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to join you this afternoon. It's afternoon on my end. I don't know, it might be good morning on other people's ends, but thank you so much for the opportunity. If I may, I will just quickly share a presentation that will more or less be my guide to our discussion this afternoon, and I've tried my best to summarize it so I can just basically walk through the different aspects. I took note of Natasha's introduction when she said ESG is no longer an obligation, and I think a lot of organizations have seen it as an obligation, but rightfully now it's actually a strategic move. So I will be looking at unlocking the social pillar of ESG. And I think in my experience around ESG and dealing with social matters, I think there's been a lot of focus on the environmental aspect, a lot of focus on the governance. But I think when you look at it critically, the environmental aspect and the governance aspect of ESG actually impact the social element of ESG. So I'll just go briefly into our presentation, some of the areas I'll be looking at. So that's defining the social element of the ESG, some of the key elements or considerations around the social pillar. I will also look into how we decide on what social aspects to adopt, looking at stakeholder mapping and risk identification from the social pillar. And I'll also just speak to how CEC is delivering on the social pillar, and then just highlight a few global case studies. I would love to highlight CEC, but we'll look at the other areas, other companies that have been successful in delivering on the social pillar. So when we look at understanding the social pillar of ESG, I think really at the end of the day, it brings a full understanding that there's a responsibility that businesses have towards its stakeholders. There's the realization that a business is committing to respecting human rights, and ultimately it's about the people and people within the organizations, people within communities, and generally people within society. So when we look at the elements of the social pillar, some of the aspects that the social pillar focuses on, you look at diversity and inclusion. So within organizations, there is an expectation now around ESG that there must be inclusivity, there must be diversity, and there must be equity in your places of work. So equity in terms of equal pay, equal work, diversity in terms of the sort of people you recruit, diversity in terms of gender as well. from a workplace perspective. The social pillar will also look at having a safe working environment. How safe is your place of work? What are the policies that you are adopting to ensure that safety becomes a culture within an organization? You also look at fair conditions of work or fair conditions of service. One of the big things around the social pillars is obviously this corporate social responsibility and community support. How are we extending what we do into our communities and giving ourselves, in essence, a social license to operate as businesses? Then you also look at human rights. You look at issues of child labor. You will consider issues of, like we're saying, equal pay and everything that is globally considered around human rights. So now when we look at deciding on the adoption of social pillars, sometimes we look at things that are nice to have, things that we think will look great in a report. But I think it really starts with our strategies. What are the strategies of the policies, firstly, that we have as an organization based on the businesses that we operate in? And I think this becomes a key aspect in terms of deciding on what social aspects in ESG that we would like to, that institutions would look to drive. Secondly, we'll look to materiality, and materiality really leads into the third point on this particular slide, which is reporting standards. So when we're looking at materiality, we're looking at basically areas that we think will impact what we do as a business. And so when we're considering materiality, we're actually trying to think, if we decide on picking a particular social pillar or social aspect to drive, whether it's about equity, whether it's about CSR initiatives, whether it's empowering people within communities, there's a materiality aspect that we need to look at that looks into how much does it impact our business, or how material is it to what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I think these materiality aspects as well are considerations that need to be made in the reporting standards that different organizations adopt. Of course, around ESG, currently there's really no set guidelines depending on your sector, but different institutions are adopting different reporting standards. And I've given an example of the Global Reporting Initiative as an example, which is also something we use within CSE. And so the materiality also then becomes a very key element into how we report and what we report. But there's more importantly, it's looking at the risks that are associated with these social initiatives that we choose to undertake as organizations, because there's always an aspect of risk management that we need to be looking at, rather than just focusing on what would be great to report on or what we think would drive our brands as businesses. So when we look at the stakeholder mapping and risk identification, this really in essence will form your basis for the social pillar that you then adopt in your organization. So obviously when we're looking at the social investments or social pillars, we need to map our stakeholders. And this is basically knowing how they influence the organization, how they impact what we do, and what is their interest in the organization. But more importantly, what is the benefit to us when we engage with these stakeholders? And this is something that we need to constantly do, because once we do that mapping, there's also a level of engagement that needs to happen. And this engagement really requires that we are constantly clear about what we're putting out to our stakeholders. This communication needs to be consistent. In most cases, in some cases, you find specific stakeholders require that there is collaboration between yourself and themselves. There needs to be a lot of consistency. We need to be looking, some of our stakeholders would demand that there's an aspect of change management that we need to drive as an institution and with that particular stakeholder. So there are various aspects that also need to be considered as we engage with our stakeholders. But also, more importantly, there's the consideration, as I indicated in the beginning, of policy and strategy. But also when we do select these initiatives, when you've done your stakeholder mapping, you understand how you engage with your stakeholders, there's also the decision about now what social investment or what social policy do we then adopt. And this must take into consideration the impact on that particular stakeholder, the development that will take place within that particular grouping, and also that it must be transformational. And I think these days we have what they're calling a just consideration in our social decisions based on the business you're in, based on the sort of environmental or governance aspects that you drive. There is the consideration of a just transitioning. How is what we're doing impacting other people within areas? So these are some of the aspects that we need to look into as we do our stakeholder mapping. But in the process of also identifying and picking up on these social pillars is the risk identification, because with every stakeholder, I believe there are associated risks that you might have in either this in the choice of social engagement you choose to have, or in fact, the choice not to have certain social engagements or social policies. If we take, for example, now I will speak to inclusivity and specifically empowerment of women within organizations. That's taking part of the center stage, whether you're talking about driving environmental awareness or, governance in organizations, opportunity in organizations. And so within an organization, if you choose not to have this as part of your, I suppose, policy from a social aspect, perhaps from a reporting point of view, yes, it may be nice to have or not to have, but then also it's about the impact. What is the impact on your employees? How will they feel about it? What is the growth and what is the development that is happening within the organization? So there are all these aspects that need to be looked at, even extending to your supply chain as an example. When you consider supply chain risk, what are the social elements you consider? So for example, I think at the beginning of my slide, we talked about human rights. So as an organization, you will look at your policies or your strategy around human rights. But the question is, what is reality is that it actually needs to extend into your value chain as well. So you'll be looking at supply chain risks. Are the vendors we're engaging with carrying or driving the same policies or same beliefs or same social standards that we are setting for ourselves and saying that we want to deliver? So these are aspects that need to be looked at. And then, of course, there's the constant monitoring of risks because they're not static. So these are risks that are constantly changing depending on what you're doing in your business, especially when you look at the environmental aspect. Like I said, the E and the G really feed into people. So as a business, depending on what you're in, I'll speak to CC. Normally, as we begin projects, we do environmental, social impact assessments. And at the beginning of the project, you will do that. But as you progress, it's not always that those social aspects or risk aspects remain the same. They could evolve in the time of the project. So there's always a need to constantly monitor the risks around these social aspects. But also, it's just the realization of the fact that risk management has benefits to the organization. When managed well, I think it supports overall reputation and really gives businesses the license to operate. So now I will speak briefly into how CEC has delivered on the social pillar of ESG. First of all, in our delivery, we take consideration of the nature of our business. So Copperbelt Energy is in the supply and distribution and transmission of power on the Copperbelt province of Zambia. And this is power that we supply primarily to the mining sector. So we're very cognizant of what our business involves, and there's infrastructure that we develop along the way. We have experiences of whether it's squatting or on our sites, When we're developing areas, you find people have been there before, had livelihoods, and there's an aspect of us having to give back and to support so that there is nothing taken away from what their normal livelihoods would have been. So a lot of what we do around the delivery of the social pillar takes that into account. And the fact, like I said, there are environmental aspects in our business that we need to manage. We recognize the impact it has on the people. And of course, there's also the governance side of it. So ultimately, a lot of how CEC delivers on the social pillar, I beg your pardon, is really a focus on impactful CSR. So in our CSR, corporate social responsibility policy, we focus on specific pillars. So amongst them is health, it's education, we focus on the environment, we focus on the youth, and we focus on infrastructural development. But as we deliver on our policies, because we also recognize that we want it to be impactful, we also look at aligning these to some of these elements to government strategy. So basically supporting some government initiatives or government's focus. So in Zambia, we have a focus on the 8th National Development Plan, which has specific targets that the government is looking to achieve in areas of health, in areas of education, in areas of the environment. And so we also look at these areas so that we try and demonstrate impact to the broader society. So if we look at the health pillar as an example, we have taken to develop a pediatric ward at the central hospital where we operate, which is in Kitwe. And we've looked to develop that. We've built schools around the area. We have also focused, when we look at the education pillar, we look at more skills transfer in as much as we might support with the building of schools or providing necessary infrastructure for the schools. We also look at skills transfer. So in development of some of our projects, we have brought in engineers from our local universities to actually practically experience maintenance and management of different engineering equipment in the sector. And also, like I said, we've identified our employees, we've identified our suppliers, we've identified our lenders among key stakeholders in the social pillars that we deliver on. And we have looked at which aspects become material for us as well in delivery of our social pillar. So for example, when we look at stakeholder engagement or community support, in the development of our projects, we engage with traditional leadership, advising them on what we are doing, why we are doing what we are doing, and where there are areas of possible empowerment, we do that. So recently in the development of some of our infrastructure, we were developing lines in an area where people had been farming before, and we had to move them to a separate place. And I think this is sort of the just transitioning that we speak to. And so we trained 72 farmers on more sustainable practices and just helping them get more value out of the business that they were already doing. Also, in terms of our social pillar, we have closely aligned to SDGs 5 and 8, which are focusing on equality, decent work and economic growth, and safe working environments. So for gender equality within CEC, we are focusing on increasing the number of females within CEC. So our target is to reach about 15%, and we look to be growing this on an annual basis. Also, when we look at decent work and economic growth, this is something that also feeds into our supply chain. It's an expectation that we have from our suppliers to be able to provide decent work conditions. And in our projects, not only focus on skilled labor, but unskilled labor as well, so that we can give that opportunity for economic growth, economic inclusivity, in our operations. But also we focus on a safe working environment. Of course, it's in the nature of our business. So we do strive to ensure that the right safety culture is driven within our organization for the benefits of the business and for the benefits of our employees that work with us. But also this is another area that is also extended to our suppliers because of the nature, again, of our business. We ensure that they have or practice the right safe measures in operating or doing work with Copperbelt Energy. So we've also developed policies that support the increase of women in our organization. And this is why we now have a target number, because this policy is in place. In terms of inclusivity as well, we are not just focusing on women, but we've extended this to looking at recruiting persons with disabilities as well as a way of including more people in our workforce. We're also embedding, again, a safety policy that I mentioned extends to our suppliers. And finally, like I said, there's the just consideration that takes into account what we do. And as we operate or build infrastructure, we ensure that the people's lives that may have been encroached in those areas are not so different when they finally move, just to ensure that they still have that sort of economic participation once they move from the areas in which we are located. Another area that we also do is it's environmental, but where we do our tree planting. But what we do is we get the communities involved in our tree planting initiatives. And what we have done to basically support the driving of impact, the driving of involvement, is that we have been providing allowances to the communities that support in this tree planting, that are supporting on checking that the trees are growing effectively. So there's a lot of extension that we have from our social pillars that we look at in terms of what we do as an organization. So just finally, I will speak to these elements very briefly. I think they are case studies of successful social implementation, and I've really just highlighted two of them. So I think many of us may know about Google and how they've, I think historically, been known for employee welfare, building an environment where their employees are comfortable to work. They have the facilities that they need, women can come in with their children. They have rooms to nurse their children. They have rooms to have their children play. So I think these are some of the successful employee welfare programs that you can talk about from a Google perspective. If you look at Coca-Cola as well, I believe Coca-Cola for some time has been driving in its CSR initiatives, just policies around women empowerment, making sure that there are solutions for women. They've empowered over 5 million women, I believe, in the company supply chain. They're increasing women's access to education. So there's a lot of focus as well on, women leadership within Coca-Cola, which are case studies that we can really reference in terms of how the social pillar is working, really not just as an obligation, but something that is strategic and really embedded in business strategy and business policy. So I'll end here, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Verona. That was a very insightful session. I can tell you that you have a lot of questions coming. People are happy to ask questions. So I'm delighted to talk about some of the things you mentioned during your presentation, because some of them are quite eye-opening. You talked about just being able to address the social pillar to be able to get results. Talking about equity, gender, whether it has to do with gender equity, or basically, you talked about also safe working environments. I can tell you that this is one thing that is very key. Companies are able to imbibe this, and once you're able to imbibe it, you don't even need to look far. You will see it you will see the impact of this thing reflecting in the lives of your employees. One thing I heard you say over and over, even without even clearly repeating the word, was impact. You talked a lot about impact, 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 impact. And impact, you refer to how it goes on to affect the lives of people. So yes, employees are the people here, even beyond the employees, your stakeholders. You talked a lot about the stakeholders being able to consistently do a clear stakeholder mapping. So first of all, to even know who your stakeholders are, and then know what strategies to engage them with. And then you talked about communication. Communication has to be very clear. And this is one thing I also heard Natasha talk about. She talked about being able to be clear with your communication. And something Natasha said that I hold very, very closely is, she said, it is indeed a journey. You know, so it's not something, it's not one-off, it's not something you just do and run. It's a journey you grow with. And she said, because it is a journey, you must invest time. You know, so yes, these things are key. You must make consistent assessments. Natasha also alluded to this. So you need to know where you are. And I heard you also say that, Verona, you need to know where you are to be able to know how to move and how to get to your destination. So yes, inclusivity is key. Impact is a must. And then talking about some of the case studies you mentioned, you talked about Google, and yes, it's something not just in the news, but people talk about it. You talked about Coca-Cola. I can talk about Newmark because I mean, it's what I experience every day, where the environment is made very easy and safe for you to work and be effective at what you do. So yes, like I said, we have a lot of questions. We have people sending in questions, but I mean, you can also still send in your questions if you have questions to add to the chat box. So I will go on with some of these questions, and I hope I don't see. Oh, yeah, very nice. Yeah. Okay, so the next question. Jeffrey Okundi, so my questions are by
I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm the only one. I don't have any sound anymore.
I don't think you are. I don't have sound either.
You're back.
I'm sorry. I lost my network for a bit, but I can. Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you. I'll just take the question again. So this question says, I am a research scientist, so my questions are biased towards that area. What are the main challenges and barriers that impede effective collaboration between scientific researchers and corporations in advancing the social pillar of ESG? How can both parties bridge these gaps to ensure more robust and impactful outcomes in social sustainability initiatives? Verna, I believe the question is addressed to you. I can take it again if you want me to take it a bit slowly. Okay.
Yes, please.
All right. So Jeffrey says, I am a research scientist, so my questions are a bit biased towards that area. So the question now is, what are the main challenges and barriers that impede effective collaboration between scientific researchers and corporations in advancing the social pillar of ESG? So he wants to know how both parties bridge these gaps to ensure more robust and impactful outcomes in social sustainability initiatives.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that question. So To be honest, I don't think there are barriers to begin with. I think between science and the social pillar, we are aware that science is evolving every day. There's something new we are discovering, even as we journey globally on this ESG aspect. There's so much that is changing around biodiversity and you know, whether it's emissions. There's so much that is changing, but like I said, it really boils down to materiality for each of the organizations. So the information we do have, but I think it boils down to materiality. What is the impact that that has on our organization, and what are we willing to do about it? So I think science is something that we carry through. If I give an example of Copper Belt Energy as an example, we in Zambia, as may be the case in some African countries, we are struggling with drought. Water levels are low. So in terms of our biodiversity, for example, support, or what we're doing around biodiversity, which we still consider part of our social pillar as we progress on our tree planting, is that we're doing this by water sources. So we are planting trees to preserve the water sources, preserve the biodiversity there. So really, it's about constant conversations. I don't think the barriers are there, but the constant conversations need to be there. It needs to link into the strategy of businesses, and it needs to be material to the business. I hope I was clear.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. I see a thumbs up. I believe the person is happy with your response. Okay, one more question for you. I mean, before we go to Natasha, Verona, someone wants to know how companies can balance short-term financial performance with long-term ESG goals and priorities. How can companies balance short-term financial performance with long-term ESG goals and priorities?
Oh, what have I done? Okay. I think I'll need a bit of clarity on this particular question. When you look at balancing your short-term financial performance with long-term ESG goals and priorities, I know that there's an expectation that there must be some sort of return when you look at the social aspect, the ESG aspect, but maybe I'll just need some clarity around this question.
Okay. But I feel like the person basically wants to know short-term financial, I mean, when you look at the financial performance of a company within the short term compared to what it looks like when they meet their ESG goals and priorities. I don't know if that's exactly what the question is about, but it's okay. We can go to the next question. So we can take the question for Natasha. It says, what are some of the best practices for board diversity and composition to ensure effective ESG oversight?
Thank you for the question. And just as a personal insight, I do believe that when company invest time, processes in ESG standards, it's good for their business resilience and it's good for the business activities. So I don't oppose the two, the financial short-term aspect and the long-term reward. I do think both are going in the making a company more resilient. When it comes to best practices, you should have, for instance, written rules when it comes to recruitment, having the possibility to have inclusiveness policies within the company. one driver I usually use is to do a kind of charter. First, you start by an assessment, where you are, what you want to tackle, what are your issues, what is the situation. Without any shame, this is where you are now. But you take the decision to move forward. But what kind of milestones do you commit to deliver towards the stakeholders, the external people, but also internally? And then you try to have not only a set of initiative, it has to be a business strategy. And strategy requires plan, resources, and someone in charge of making the right decision. So you should be clear about what is important for you, because I believe you can't tackle all the initiative all at once. That's why I say it's a journey. So for your company, what is the most important steps you want to deliver? And then you can launch a starter to valorize best practices. What you are already doing in terms of inclusivity, in terms of giving everyone the same chances, in terms of facilitating the life of parents with young kids, the fact that you can provide trainings to your employees so they have more skills within your company. There are many rooms for maneuvers and many possibilities, but a good start, because you can be proud of working in your company, is to have this charter where we want to go, but also to valorize best practices that are already in place. And then
thank you very much, Verona.
It's important also to have a periodic management of where you are. So these management systems of kind of review of where you are in your strategy to ensure the right implementation.
Thank you very much. So you started by saying there has to be an assessment. So you need to do an assessment to know exactly what you're looking for and know the right people to put in place so that you get the results you're looking for. And then you ended with saying there has to be a monitoring, there has to be an evaluation at the end of the day to see if exactly what you're doing is what has to be done and how much impact you have made so far. So yes, that's very insightful. Thank you so much for that response. The next question will go to Verona. Toluani wants to know the differences between corporate social responsibility and the social pillar of ESG.
Okay, so thank you so much for that question. So there is a difference between the two. You see, this corporate social responsibility is only one aspect of the social pillar. As I presented earlier, the social pillar covers various areas. So it could look at equity, it could look at diversity, it could look at human rights, and social responsibility just forms part of those aspects or elements of the social pillar in ESG. I hope that's clear. Great.
All right, thank you, Verona. Yes. I see a thumbs up. Thank you, Verona. Okay, Lucas says you spoke about inclusivity and perhaps gender balancing. What percentage of women are your payroll? Lucas, would you want to reach out to Verona after the call? But I mean, it's Verona, I don't know if you want to take that question, but I believe you made your points clear during the presentation.
Yes, we did, but I'm still happy to respond to it. So So it's a target that we have. I think historically engineering and the business that we're in has been very male dominated. And so we're basically looking at growing this number. Currently, we're at 15% of women, and we're looking to continue to grow this more. So I hope that understands. I think that basically responds to the number that we would have on payroll as well.
Thank you, Verona. Thank you so much. Toluwani wants to know, so the question is for Verona and Natasha, so any one of you can answer. She says, thank you so much for the insights. And she goes on to ask, what are the key practices for effectively measuring and reporting on governance to ensure compliance with ESG frameworks like GRI and OECD? And how do they contribute to organizational sustainability?
I can answer for with a European perspective, because in the European norms, ESRS, we have a set of topics that we have to tackle in terms of governance. I don't remember the exact terms, but we have some processes to follow, which were summarized in the 5 items that I said in my introduction speech. But they are cross-cutting standards in these European standards that have been developed over the last 2 or 3 years, which are governance relating disclosure elements. And these disclosure elements gives you a kind of framework within which you can decide what is your priority as a company. Because as we said with Verona, it's taking seriously ESG doesn't come overnight. It's a long process. It's a substantial change management process within a company. So you really have to decide. You have this overall international standards, but you have to decide what is of the utmost importance for you as a company, given what your company is doing, the territory where it operates, and it requires appropriate communication towards your stakeholders and internally towards who you're working for and with. But my key insight will be, it's all about transparency. If you're transparent about what you do, it's the first start in terms of good governance, because it's encompass remuneration, it encompass inclusivity, lobbying, everything with this G standards is about how transparent you are about what you do and how you do it.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Natasha. That was one of the things I took from your presentation when you said transparency, because transparency goes on to build trust. So thank you for that. We can go to the next question, and I think it is directed to Verona. So Nathaniel says, how can organizations effectively measure and improve their social performance while managing the risks associated with their social initiatives? How can organizations effectively measure and improve their social performance while managing the risks associated with their social initiatives?
Okay, so like I said, risk management is something that is ongoing. The social initiatives that we deliver, I believe, need constant monitoring and evaluation. Within communities, when we're carrying out our CSR initiatives, we need to constantly monitor and evaluate because we're exposed to various risks. So basically the opportunity is there to continue to create that balance. you can deliver the social initiative, but we need to continue to monitor and evaluate risks that come up as we deliver on these initiatives.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Verona. Fina says, wow, such an insightful and informative session. So now her question is, in the context of ESG, what real-world examples of successful strategies have enhanced social performance within organizations? So basically, she's asking for examples of successful strategies that have enhanced social performance within organizations.
Okay, thank you, Loveline. So I think at the end of my presentation, I did give examples that obviously we're seeing the results, but I think these are results of successful strategies around the social element of ESG, because we're able to see the stories, we're able to read the stories, you know, within, you know, different networks or online. So I think for me, those are results of effective strategies.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that response. We have a few more questions to go. I'll just take some of them. So this one says, how can collaborations between corporate sectors? Oh yeah, I think oh no, not the same question. It says, how can collaborations between corporate sectors and scientific researchers enhance the development of governance metrics that are both innovative and effective? What role do these metrics play in promoting organizational sustainability? And what challenges might arise in these interdisciplinary partnerships? So the first says, how can collaborations between corporate sectors and scientific researchers enhance the development of governance metrics that are both innovative and effective? How do the metrics play a role in promoting organizational sustainability, and what challenges might arise in the partnership? Natasha,
yes, I may
can you
have
respond to this?
a direct answer. You can manage only what you can measure. So the first step is to have this, what I call G matrix. But the key components of this matrix has to be linked with where you are, because it's not just a copy-paste exercise. You have some of the key items, but once you've done your assessments, you have to see, are we compliant with ESG standards at international level? What kind of process can I implement within the company? It can be, for instance, just training programs or having internal procedure that will drive the changes. So there is no one-fits-all answer to these questions. It really has to be a targeted approach while respecting a kind of widely recognized standards. And this is where you can work with scientists that will have a kind of ready-made matrix that they can share with you in order to get you think about what you can improve. But don't try to copy-paste something existing, because once again, it's not about being compliant with rules.
I heard that. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you. It's not a copy and paste business. So you said you cannot manage what you cannot measure. That's exactly. That's very clear. Because like you said during your presentation, if you're not able to measure, you cannot make good progress. So that's something I'm taking back to implement. So yes, we're coming to the end of this session. It's been very brilliant. It's been very insightful. very impactful, I would say. I've taken a lot of notes, and I'm sure everybody here feels the same way. I'll just mention some of the key things I'm taking home. So when Natasha started, she started by saying it's important to know that this is a process. It's not an overnight affair. It's a process. It's a journey. You start from somewhere, but you don't just start and keep moving in the sense that you don't have to do any evaluation. So she made it clear that in as much as you need to start because it's a journey, you also need to evaluate your journey as you go, so that you can tell if you're making progress or not. She also said something about being able to make deliberate assessments of where you are, so that you know exactly where you're starting from, so you know what, like you're taking a journey. You need to already think about the journey to know if you're going to a desert, you know what you need to take to a desert. If you're going somewhere to have fun, you know what you need to take to, So yes, that's the point. You need to think of where you are and consider where you're going. And you talked about being able to build a board that gives results. And to be able to do that, you need to make a proper assessment. You need to know, who do I need on this board? What do I want to see in my company? And who are the people that have what it takes to be able to bring this to bear? So now you're looking for them, you find them, and you don't just find them and keep them there. There has to be a growth across board. You have to keep making sure that they get the right trainings, they get the environment that they need to thrive. And then you're doing a proper board evaluation to make sure that everybody is doing as well as they should. And then Verona talked about very key things. She talked about inclusivity. It's important to make sure that the right people are on the table. You have to make sure that you have the right balance. She also talked about being able to do a proper stakeholder mapping to know who your stakeholders are, because it is until you identify your stakeholders that you're able to create proper strategies to be able to reach them. And communication is also very key. You need to be sure that you're communicating right, that you're very transparent across board, that you're passing the right information, and you're passing the information clearly. She talked about being able to ensure that the work environment is safe, and ensuring that you have fair conditions at work. She gave some of the case studies from Google and Coca-Cola, and then I came in there to add mine, which is Newmark, which I can beat my chest and talk about, So this conversation has been very brilliant and key, and you see how much I've learned. And I'm happy to tell you that a lot of people on this platform right now are going back to implement some of the things that they have gained from this meeting. So it's a pleasure, and I know some people are not happy that the session is ending, but our panelists have to go back to their business. So thank you, everybody. It's been a very insightful session. I'm happy everybody has gained something. I look forward to having some of these conversations in the future with some of you. Thank you once again for your participation and engagement. So like I said, this is a continuous conversation. I remember what Natasha said. It is a process. It is a journey. So yes, we'll be inviting you on this special journey that is very important to us. We look forward to seeing you in our next session, and we hope to continue this conversation with you. But before we let you go, it's a pleasure to announce that this webinar and all of the ones we've had earlier are on YouTube. They've been published on the Newmark YouTube channel. Please feel free to visit and learn more about some of the things we've discussed in the past. Also, kindly engage with us across our social media platforms. So on Facebook, you will find us as at Newmark Group Limited. On X, you see at Newmark World, and on LinkedIn, you can find us when you type in at the Newmark Group. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is where we draw the curtain today. Thank you very much, and we see you next time.